Welcome, everyone, to another True North Talk. My name is Andrew Lawton, a fellow with True North, joined by another fellow with the True North, who I've not yet had the opportunity to do one of these, and that is Leo Knight, who I know was introduced to you watching by Candace Malcolm a few days ago, and also is tremendously well-known and well-respected in Canada for his work on security issues, former Vancouver police officer, former RCMP officer, and joins me now. Leo, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on today.
You're most welcome, Andrew.
We need to talk about the law enforcement implications of the controversy that's been unfolding with the Prime Minister's office and SNC-Lavalin. And just for a little bit of backstory to people here, SNC-Lavalin is not a company that has never had brushes with corruption and scandal before. In fact, it's hard-pressing to come up with a Canadian company that has had as many, not just allegations, but convictions on these grounds as SNC-Lavalin, from illegal campaign donations to bribes to more bribery. And ideally, with companies like these, we should be looking at lawmakers that are not going to be accepting any influence. And that's where it comes to really the significance of looking at both sides of the equation here. But when we look at the report from the Globe and Mail this week, which the Prime Minister's office has denied, Trudeau or Trudeau's agents in his office allegedly tried to pressure the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to intervene in a prosecution of SNC-Lavalin over its connections to bribes in Libya. And let me ask you, Leo, I mean, when you see this story, is this a political scandal, or is this something that could have the potential for criminal wrongdoing with what's come out so far?
Well, I think it's both, actually. The political side of things, I think, are pretty obvious. When you have the Prime Minister's office trying to pressure an Attorney General to do something or to back off a prosecution, I think that's a political scandal that certainly will come home to roost. But there's a criminal side to it, too. Section 139, subsection 2 of the Criminal Code seems pretty clear on this, where it says, let me just quote to you directly, everyone who willfully attempts in any manner other than the manner described in subsection 1, which refers to sureties, to obstruct, pervert, or defeat the course of justice is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to 10 years. That doesn't seem vague at all. If the Prime Minister's office did, in fact, quote, pressure, I noticed that he had a denial or a non-denial, whatever it was, instruct. I believe the Globe story said pressure, and I think we need to make sure we understand the difference. But if they did, in fact, try to pressure to back off a prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, then it may well fall directly under that section of the Criminal Code, and to which I would say the RCMP should be investigating.
I think that's a very important point you raise. And the question that I would ask is, would the RCMP ever self-initiate an investigation like this? Or would this be something where there'd have to be a complaint or a whistleblower or someone connected to the case going to the RCMP?
The RCMP self-initiates investigations all the time, whether they be in corruption or organized crime or just they have dude. Whether you're talking multiple ends of the spectrum, they will self-initiate. It would perhaps be better if, in this particular case, maybe the Speaker of the House or the Chairman of the Judicial Committee perhaps made a reference, but the RCMP can certainly self-initiate.
And one of the interesting things that's come out as well in the follow-up to this story is the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, saying she can't reveal anything because of attorney-client privilege. And this, I think, is very odd, because when you are the attorney for a country, you'd think that your client is really the people, is the idea of accountability to the public, not like she's representing SNC-Lavalin or just some random person as an individual.
Well, the theory that she's using is that as Solicitor General, her client is the Government of Canada. Whether that would stand up to a court challenge, I certainly am not a lawyer, and I wouldn't presume to suggest that. But that seems to be what she's saying. What is also interesting, I'm not sure if you noticed it this morning, but her dad posted a Facebook message out where he actually used the terms relative to his daughter, how proud she was that she stood firm, and that led to her demotion. And he specifically used the phrase demotion.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, and that gets more into the political side of this, which reinforces what you mentioned earlier, that this is a case where we certainly have firing on both sides. To go back to the company itself for a moment, you actually directed me to a story I hadn't seen before from 5.5 years ago or so, when SNC-Lavalin's corruption in the eyes of the World Bank was so significant that it put Canada in a spot of occupying more space on the list of companies that shouldn't be allowed to do business globally. And this dovetails on something that Charlie Angus, the NDP MP, said a couple of days ago, that SNC-Lavalin, and this was before the story involving the PMO, that SNC-Lavalin shouldn't be allowed to bid on federal contracts because of this. And when you compare that to the fact that this company has had massive access to many stakeholders in the government, including the Prime Minister's office, through lobbying, you have to wonder why a company like this is even allowed to engage with its track record, and why, for optics or legal reasons, the PMO has been giving it an audience.
Well, the connections between SNC-Lavalin and the Liberal Party of Canada go back decades. The lobbying, the funding, the government, the corporate welfare the government's given them over the years, contributions. There's just, it's so deep. You know, and bear in mind as well, Andrew, that the Liberal Party of Canada is no stranger to corruption. I mean, I can refer you back to the Prime Minister John Chrétien government, you know, when they had Shawinigan, followed by ad scam. There was the $1 billion boondoggle. There was you know, Shovelgate. There was so many scandals with that government, and a lot of it involved money flowing into and out of Quebec and Quebec corporations. This should be nothing new to anybody. However, having said that, it seems like in this particular case there may be a very specific breach of the Criminal Code of Canada.
If the RCMP is investigating or does investigate, how long, in your estimation, would it take for that to lead to charges, to lead to anything in the way of a conviction? Are we talking about years or months?
That's really difficult to say. It's a little bit like asking how long is a piece of string. It depends how the pressure was put, if in fact there was pressure from the PMO. It also depends on who did it. It depends on how many persons were in the loop. It depends on how the Attorney General perceived the interference, if you will. There's a number of unanswered questions that we just don't know at this point in time. But I'm merely suggesting that on the surface of things, assuming the Globe and Mail, there seems to be a breach of the criminal code.
And this is one of those cases where that term plausible deniability could come into play, of who was in the loop, who was out of the loop, and who was very deliberately and willfully out of the loop.
True, and we also saw in the case of Mark Norman that's going on currently, that there seems to be an effort within this Prime Minister's office to get involved in discussions and make sure there's no notes or follow-up trail. So that could be an issue in terms of any investigation that the RCMP might do into this particular question.
True North fellow and former police officer Leo Knight. Leo, thanks very much.
You're very welcome, Andrew.